So I am recently retired. I am former program director for Lutheran Disaster Response, which is the disaster ministry of the Evangelical Lutheran Church in America. And you can see here the mission statement that it has. We have with that as well too. I did this work in Iowa for several years, and then had the opportunity to move to Chicago, where the church headquarters is, and I retired officially last August, although I've been done doing disaster work for a couple of years with that. So really pleased to be able to be here. When I thought about this class and how best to approach it, assuming taking a little bit from what your task is, assuming that you are members of a community that have been impacted by a disaster in some leadership positions, wondering, okay, how are we best going to be able to help the people that have been impacted by the disaster? And so that starts with the approach with it. First is that you don't have to do this alone. I had that when I started the disaster work. Boy, it's all on me, the responsibility is there. But soon realized that there are a lot of partners that are with us and wanting to help. All you need to do is really reach out if they don't already reach out to you. Operate on the principle of accompaniment. Accompaniment means that you're not coming in as a savior, but that you are in partnership with the local community. That's where all disasters are local. They have the answers as well. And that's what I say the asset-based approach, if you know anything about asset management, asset-based approach organization, is that I firmly believe that every community has all the resources it needs to recover from its disaster. Now, sometimes those resources are knowing who to ask outside the community, but it's all able to do that. So rather than coming in with all the answers, being the great white hope and all the wonderful to be able to help you, that it's rather to listen, and then when you get done listening, you need to listen some more, because the real solutions come from the local people in the organizations, because they know what's best about their own community and how their own community is unique. In the previous presentation, I don't know if anybody had seen that, but talked about each individual community sometimes has a variety, the differences than especially indigenous peoples have a different way of approaching things, and people of color than say us in the white community. So it's really to listen and to be able to help them to be able in their recovery. So there are many actors in disaster response. Of course, the disaster cycle, we know about that, and there are multiple actors in all the different phases of that. FEMA, of course, is probably the best known, but there are disaster response agencies at every level of government. I'm here in the Metro Chicago area, and not only is there the state emergency management, but also the city of Chicago itself has its own emergency management organization, and then also the county does as well. So they all work together. So you have to know all that's there, but then there are businesses, religious and civic groups, and other organizations that are involved in disaster response. So the question is, how do we get all of coordinate the efforts, because there are limited resources, and almost by definition, with every disaster, there are limited resources, and every person, every organization comes in with its own agenda. Now, granted, it may be the overall agenda is to be able to help people, but there are also sub-agendas. Many of the nonprofits especially have their own donor base. Businesses have, of course, shareholders and bosses, and even in religious and civic groups, there are many structures that people come in with a variety of various agendas. So how best to do that is simple. From the national or VOAD movement, Voluntary Organizations Active in Disaster, I'm going to talk a little bit about the national level, and you see here the 4 C's that are talked about. And that here, if you ever are interested to look it up, I'd maybe recommend to do this maybe after the presentation sometime, to look up the nvoad.org site. It's something that I had bookmarked when I was doing this work and referred to every once in a while, quite often, I should say, rather than every once in a while. It is a membership-based organization that is non-governmental. Now, governmental agencies are maybe in contact with it and are affiliate, but they are not actually full members with that. It's an organization where knowledge and resources are shared. There's over 70. I'm going to talk a little bit about those in a minute. Then one of the values of it is that they created guidelines and consensus on many topics of disaster response. If you can think of something that that's in disaster response, how best to go about doing it, this would be the way to go. Instead of best practices, this is what talking with folks from this organization taught me, instead of best practices, you talk about leading practices, because what is best? Maybe what is best in Missouri would be different than what is best in Louisiana or Illinois. So you go with leading practices, and then to be able to have it modified for your own community. So there are every state and territory of the United States has a VOAD, but then there's also local ones that sometimes cities, counties, but even within a county, there may be several VOADs within there. And sometimes you'll find reference to COADs, which are community organizations active in disaster. They're very similar. Maybe those maybe include some that are maybe not so voluntary with that as well, but that's fine because the work still goes on, and we'll see here in a minute how some of the values of that. So how they do the work, and this is how long-term recovery groups, and these are the groups that I helped to set up throughout Iowa, and then also working through our network. We had a Lutheran Disaster Response is by the affiliate system. We work through social service agencies and helping our coordinators in each state and territory work together to form long-term recovery groups. This is the best way to provide long-term recovery efforts for a community that's been impacted by a disaster. So there's the cooperation, communication, coordination, and collaboration. And we refer to these all the time as, of course, the 4 C's. And as you go on, and Corey might be able to even say this is the case, how he saw that actually when he was doing some things out in the field, how these actually take place. And it may not be as formally sit down going through the 4 C's, but they're in mind when people come together and to discuss the work. They really do openly through all these different through the 4 C's. So here's a list of some, and I'm going to go through and tell you a little bit about what they do. Some of them you may already recognize, but some of them were new to me, and it's really interesting. And first, let me back up, is that what people have done to be able to respond to a disaster, it's all done organically. There was never a big seminar or session that sat down going, okay, who's going to be doing the emergency feeding? Who's going to be doing the long-term case management, the disaster case management? Who's going to do the rebuilding? Organizations came, they said they wanted to be able to give something to survivors, those impacted, and they looked around and say, oh, here's some gaps, and this is a gap that we can fill. Now, as you go through, you'll see several of these will have the same similar mission, similar sort of activities, but there's often plenty of work to do. It took me a little bit when I did the work in Iowa in 2008. I had 90% of the disaster case management. Those are the people working with survivors as they create their recovery plan, helping them to recover from that disaster. And I was a little bit disappointed right away, saying, well, why don't we have 100%? Why doesn't the agency, why don't we do that? And I realized we don't have to do everything. There are other organizations that are able to do it just as well as we are. So going to this list here, Advent Disaster Response comes from the Seventh-day Adventist churches. Their expertise is in donations management. They are really good at setting up warehouses and being able to distribute. As you might imagine, there are many, many things that come in during a time of disaster, and they really are great to organize it to be able to put it out to those that are needed. And if kind of in every disaster presentation, I had to say this out in the field, but I'll say it to you as well. If you know people who want to send clothes, please do whatever you possibly can to tell them, do not send clothes unless they are specifically requested. They say that the second disaster in disaster is clothing. And so to make sure that the needs are there and it doesn't get clogged up, the distribution system doesn't get clogged, that to make sure clothing is not something that is sent out unless it's specifically requested. And that's usually the case, say, for children's things, or say certain like men's over jackets or coats, winter coats, if it's a time. American Red Cross, most of you are not familiar with the American Red Cross. Tzu Chi is a Buddhist organization based out of California. It's interesting that they come with cash and gift cards. First, it was kind of like, well, wait a minute, how do you know that they're doing it right? Well, to do that, they have a great system of making sure that the people who are indeed impacted by the disaster receive the funds or the gift cards, and that realizing that even when Red Cross comes in, they supplement all that, because if you lost everything, $100, $200 can go a long way just to get you through to the next day or the next week with that as well. Catholic Charities USA provides a variety of services, but primarily disaster case management. Islamic Relief does also disaster case management, but they also do a lot of the cleanup work. Jewish Federation's Lutheran Disaster Response, we primarily did with things with long-term recovery, but we also had volunteer management. And then you see Samaritan's Purse, but then Disaster Services of St. Vincent de Paul, they also are really good at disaster case management, having cleanup, but they have a kind of a really wonderful project called House in a Box, that when if it comes into the community, they have, and after a home is rebuilt, they provide that opportunity for people to receive all the items that they might need to be able to furnish a home. Salvation Army, most of them know them, of course, from the bell ringers, but that's a different arm, different branch of it. The Salvation Army does do disaster recovery work. The United Methodist Conferences on Relief, UMCOR, they do disaster case management and cleanup, and they have a great volunteer network system that ties in with this disaster work to be able to go and help a community rebuild or even to clean up after disaster. Southern Baptist Convention Disaster Relief, they do cleanup as well, sometimes with chainsaws. They're known for that, but also they have a great feeding. They have sometimes large trailers that they bring in, and that they provide food for those that are impacted by the disaster, but often for those that are doing the cleanup and the rebuilding work. Operation Barbecue Relief, just kind of what it says, it provides barbecue for survivors and cleanup and first responders and others working in a disaster area. Presbyterian Disaster Assistance, Presbyterian Church USA, that they do a lot of the same things. One of their real two specialties that they have is emotional and spiritual care. As you might imagine, people have been impacted severely by a disaster, often have a great deal of emotional trauma, and they are able to help people to be able to process that. But the other part that they're really experts in are volunteer management. They have a great system of helping to work with other partners, local communities, to set up volunteer reception centers and places that have long-term opportunities for rebuilding. A lot of organizations have their own, but for a multi-organizational one, they're really the go-to people about how to get signed up. They often have like an 800 number to call or a website to be able to sign up. Team Rubicon is a fairly newer organization, and they're wonderful in that they are, they got to get it right here. They are former members of the military that work with cleaning up and rebuilding. The philosophy behind that is that they were serving our country, and now coming together, and they're looking for another purpose of service. And so they really reach out and serve those that are disaster survivors. Partnerships with Native Americans, just with that, using that all the separate nations. You may or may not be aware of that because of all the treaties that the Native tribes are separate countries and separate political organizations and kind of maybe countries. I like to consider them that. And so it's really to partnership and help them to tie in with some of the VOAD partners. Points of Light started back in George H.W. Bush's organization or presidency. So at time of disaster, to start a long-term recovery committee, it happens either three ways. The state or local VOAD, COAD either transitions into a long-term recovery group, that's the entire group becomes one. Obviously, if it's a committee of 20 or 30, that doesn't happen, but many times it's just 5 or 10 people, and they come together and become that long-term recovery group. And then when the recovery is over, they go back to being that VOAD or COAD. Or else they create long-term recovery groups in that impacted communities, and we'll kind of talk about that in a minute here. Or they create just a committee to work with those impacted. If it's a smaller disaster, they may not have an actual long-term recovery group, but there would be a need to be able to address the unmet needs. And I think it's always important to say that we address unmet needs, that we're never able to meet all people's unmet needs following a disaster. Most likely they're so overwhelmed, and that we just have to be able to do what we can to address their needs. So then the long-term recovery group, representative from sectors within a community that help individuals and families recover. And they have a variety of roles, but again, address the unmet needs of those impacted as well. So it may include leaders, members of faith communities. When I was helping to organize them, I always went, of course, for me, because I had an in with, there were Lutheran churches to do that, but another VOAD partners who are faith-based also reach out to their faith leaders and to be able to have them engaged with the long-term recovery group. Community members or leaders, the official ones, sometimes I've had mayors or city council people or city commissioners be on it, but sometimes maybe the best leaders are those that are de facto leaders and that they're not actually elected, that they're the ones that everybody looks to. And then national organizations, if there are local representatives in that area, that during the flooding in 2008 in Iowa, that there were 4 of us faith community people came together, and we were kind of went around helping to form long-term recovery groups. And we all called upon our local people to have them be engaged first and to be a part of this long-term recovery group. And then if it's a federally declared disaster, FEMA is glad to be a part of that, and will really do a great job of helping to form a long-term recovery group and provide various informational resources. And then, of course, local organizations. And here's a list of some of those that may include. All of these I have engaged in a long-term recovery group. American Legion, that sounds kind of strange because most of the time it's more seniors, but found out that if they get a letter from their headquarters, from their commander, that they are a 501c3, which is a nonprofit, they can, if you find the right treasurer of that group, they're able to help provide the funding, the accounting and the writing of the checks and things for a disaster. It only happened one time, but it was always something that I started to look at if they have active people, because they know many people. Part of the value of these is all these groups know the local people, know the people that have been impacted, and know some of the politics and the dynamics of a community, and know where to watch out to step, and also where to go through. Then Kiwanis Club, Lions Club, those are, of course, service organizations. United Way, they can really be a very helpful organization for being fiscal agents as well, because they are well respected in communities and provide funding as well. They have to, so another one is the Chamber of Commerce, because obviously they work with businesses and to help bring people together for that. Eagles Clubs. Now, social service agencies, you may or may not be aware of that. For Lutherans, it's like Lutheran Social Services or social services of this other agency that may call themselves that. One that people forget about in every state and has in every county is a part of Area Agency on Aging, the AAAs, and that those have programs that are specifically for senior citizens, and that is a way to help provide connection, because they know who their clients are, but also to be able to provide information as their trusted partner, and that they help many senior citizens. Also, every state and county has area action agencies. These are required, both of these by law. These are the ones that say provide heating assistance in the winter for those in northern climates. So they also have a good connection with processes about signing people up for needs. They can also help with going through the application for food stamps and say disaster food assistance and various things along that line. Then, of course, other community leaders, as I mentioned, that folks raise up and say, you know, if you're going to have an organization that has any credibility in this community, you need to have blank person in, or this or that person as a part of it. But really, any organization that has a stake in assisting its community in its recovery is a great person, a great group to be able to have a representative. And that they may not be able to be at every meeting, but to be able to give credence and also input. Remember that it's that concept of accompaniment, in that they know best about their own community.